Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're diving into one of ancient Rome's most fascinating secrets. What was daily life really like for the women society pushed to its margins? Their routines looked simple, yet they carried stories of survival, hidden influence, and contradictions that Rome itself could never resolve. This isn't just history, it's a mirror for us today. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm creating here. And I'd love to know, what time is it for you right now? And where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below, and let's create a little map of everyone joining this journey tonight.
Did you know that in ancient Rome, the women who were most despised, the ones labeled as dishonorable, often earned more in a single day than an honest worker could dream of? This quiet contradiction is one of the most astonishing truths of Roman society. The heartbeat of Rome's economy was the coin called the as. For the ordinary laborer, the man hauling stones, the farmer bent over in the sun, the worker mixing mortar on a construction site, life was measured in just 5 asses a day. That was the value of sweat, of aching muscles, of endless toil. Yet for a prostitute, a woman pushed to society's edges, the day could bring 10 asses or more, twice the wage, sometimes 3 times. But the shine of those coins was an illusion. Many of these women were slaves. Their earnings flowed not into their own pockets, but into the hands of their owners. Even those who were free were rarely truly free, for pimps, innkeepers, and brothel masters claimed their share. The money passed through their fingers, but like water slipping through cupped hands, it seldom stayed. And yet, imagine the paradox. In a city where honor was prized above all, where dignity was guarded as fiercely as one's life, it was the dishonorable profession that could command the higher price. A farmer, back broken from plowing, might look with both envy and disdain at a woman who earned more by enduring a different kind of labor. She was needed and hated, profitable and damned. This is Rome, a society built on contradictions, on layers of wealth and shame intertwined. The prostitutes of the empire lived in shadows, marked with infamia, but without them, the machine of Roman pleasure and economy faltered. Their daily existence balanced between survival and exploitation, wealth and humiliation. And when the night grew quiet, perhaps one could not help but wonder if those who were branded with dishonor could still rise to earn more than the respectable. What did that say about Rome's values? And softly whispered across the centuries, what does it say about us?
The city of Rome awoke not with silence, but with a chorus of sound. The creaking of wagon wheels over cobblestones, the shouts of market vendors, the cries of slaves carrying amphorae on their shoulders. Dawn in the eternal city was never gentle. It was busy, loud, relentless. And in the midst of this chaos, women who lived on the margins began preparing for their own kind of labor. For the prostitutes of Rome, morning was not a time of leisure.
It was the moment to become visible, to transform themselves into the role society had forced upon them. A woman of respectable standing dressed in the stola, the long gown that symbolized chastity and dignity. But prostitutes were forbidden this mark of virtue. Instead, they wore the toga, a garment usually reserved for men. It clung differently. It carried a different message. On the streets, that simple fabric announced who they were before a word was spoken. Cosmetics, too, played their part. Heavy rouge on the lips, chalky powder to pale the skin, kohl smudged around the eyes. In a society that prized modesty for wives and mothers, these women painted themselves in vivid colors, a walking contrast to the muted tones of virtue. Their very appearance was designed not to blend in, but to stand apart, even to be condemned. And as the men of Rome marched to work, builders climbing scaffolds, craftsmen opening workshops, farmers trudging with tools, the prostitutes prepared for encounters of another kind. Their tools were not hammers or plows, but smiles rehearsed in the mirror, words of seduction, and the ability to mask exhaustion behind a veil of allure. While one man lifted stones, a woman lifted her eyes with a practiced glance, each act its own form of labor. And it is here that the paradox deepens, for who was truly more exhausted at the end of the day? The laborer whose body ached from carrying bricks, or the woman whose spirit sagged from carrying the desires of strangers? The farmer bent by the weight of harvest, or the prostitute bent beneath the burden of being endlessly desired yet never respected? Rome, in all its glory, thrived on such contrasts, the respectable and the dishonorable, the visible and the hidden, the farmer who sustained life and the prostitute who sustained pleasure. Both essential, both laborers, but treated as if they lived on opposite ends of existence. And when the city's streets were flooded with golden light of morning, perhaps one could almost hear the quiet sigh beneath painted lips, a sigh that whispered of fatigue, of survival, of a role played not by choice, but by necessity. And softly, like a thought drifting with the morning wind, the question lingers. In a city so proud of honor, why was dishonor always so profitable?
By midday, the city of Rome reached its peak of noise and life, the forum filled with voices of merchants and magistrates. Temples welcomed streams of worshippers, and the streets were alive with trade, gossip, and dust. Yet just a short walk away from the grandeur of marble arches and bustling markets, another kind of business unfolded, one hidden, one dimly lit, but no less essential to the rhythm of the city. This was the hour when the Lupanars, the brothels of Rome, truly came alive. They were not places of luxury, but cramped rooms carved into narrow streets and alleys. Each chamber was barely large enough for a stone bed, often covered with straw or a worn blanket. On the walls, faded frescoes displayed erotic scenes, not so much art as advertisement. For a client uncertain of what he desired, the images served as both inspiration and instruction. The prices were as varied as the clientele. A quick encounter might cost as little as 2 asses, barely the price of a loaf of bread. For a more experienced courtesan, the fee could rise to 8 or 10 asses. It was still cheaper than a fine dinner, and so the brothels never lacked for customers. Men came from every walk of life: slaves, soldiers, shopkeepers, even senators in disguise. Desire, after all, knew no social rank. But for the women inside, this was no marketplace of pleasure. It was a factory of exhaustion. A single day could bring a dozen men, sometimes more. Each encounter demanded not only the body, but also the performance. A smile feigned, a sigh rehearsed, a voice coaxing. The mask of allure never dropped, even when the spirit beneath it was crumbling. The air inside the Lupanar was heavy. Oil lamps smoked against the stone walls, filling the rooms with a haze. The scent of sweat and cheap perfume lingered, mixing into a pungent fog that clung to skin and hair. There were no windows, no breeze, only the cycle of footsteps coming and going, a rhythm as relentless as the pounding of tools in the workshops outside. And still, there was profit. By midday, a prostitute could already have earned what a common worker made in 2 days. The coins clinked, the ledgers filled, the brothel owners smiled. Rome, in all its might, relied on this shadow economy to keep desires satisfied and tensions eased. Yet imagine the paradox once more. Outside, men built aqueducts and forums, shaping the skyline of an empire. Inside, women labored just as tirelessly, shaping themselves into objects of desire again and again. Both forms of work were essential. Both drained the human spirit, but only one was cloaked in honor. And as the afternoon light slanted across the city, filtering into the narrow alleys where the Lupanars hid, perhaps one could almost hear the silence between footsteps. The silence of women who knew that wealth was within their grasp, yet never truly theirs. And softly, like a shadow across the stones, the thought lingers: what is the true cost of a coin earned in the dark?
As the sun sank behind the hills, Rome did not grow quieter, it grew brighter. Torches were lit along the streets, music drifted from taverns, and the city prepared itself for pleasures of a different kind. The evening belonged not to labor, but to celebration. And within those celebrations, the women's society called Dishonorable was suddenly summoned into the center of attention. There were festivals in Rome when prostitutes were not hidden in alleys or confined to brothels, but walked openly in the light of the crowd. During Floralia, the festival of the goddess Flora, prostitutes were invited to dance, to strip, to perform in ways that blurred the lines between sacred ritual and public spectacle. Ordinary citizens, men, women, even children, watched as the women shed their garments, their movements both scandalous and strangely sanctified by tradition. The paradox was as vivid as the flames that lit the night. By day, these women were mocked, spat upon, and branded with infamy. By evening, they were the stars of Rome's most raucous celebrations, encouraged to embody the chaos and fertility the festival honored. Their very presence was transformed into ritual, their shame into a kind of communal entertainment. On these nights, their earnings could multiply. Wealthy men competed for their company, eager to turn festival pleasure into private indulgence. Coins exchanged hands as easily as wine was poured. And for a few hours, a prostitute might earn more than she did in several ordinary days. Yet even in the height of revelry, she remained both desired and despised. Applause and laughter could not erase the mark of infamy. The festivals revealed something deeper about Rome, its ability to bend morality when it suited joy. In everyday life, prostitutes were reminders of vice, but in celebration they became symbols of vitality, of abundance, of Rome's refusal to restrain its appetites. It was as if the city itself whispered, "We condemn you by law, but we cannot celebrate without you." And so, beneath the garlands and laughter, one can imagine the women smiling, performing, taking the coins, all while knowing that when the torches died and the night ended, they would return to the shadows. For a brief moment, dishonor became spectacle, and profit wore the mask of praise, but only until morning. In the soft glow of festival fires, perhaps a quiet truth emerged. A society can both scorn and celebrate the same people, needing them while pretending to despise them. And like the smoke rising into the night air, the thought lingers. What does it say of a civilization when joy itself depends on those it calls shameful?
When the festivals ended and the torches burned low, Rome slipped into a different rhythm. The bustling noise of the day softened into murmurs. Footsteps echoed against the stone alleys, and the city exhaled into night. Yet for the prostitutes of Rome, there was little rest. The revelry left behind coins, but also fatigue. And as the laughter faded, silence returned to the narrow rooms of the Lupanars. Imagine the scene. A woman sits alone on a rough bed, the straw mattress flattened by the weight of countless strangers. Her painted face now smudged, her rouge worn away, her eyes heavy, not from wine, but from exhaustion. In the ledger of the brothel, the tally of coins looked impressive, more than what many men earned in days of honest labor. Yet in her own hands was little. What remained was not wealth, but weariness. This was the quiet truth of her existence. Money flowed, yes, but never into her keeping. Desire poured into her room, but respect never followed. She was part of the very machinery that kept Rome vibrant, its men sated, its festivals lively. Yet she was always an outsider, marked with a brand, invisible yet powerful: Infamia, dishonor. And so the paradox circled back once more. Rome admired its laborers, praised its soldiers, honored its matrons, but it could not deny the role of prostitutes, even as it condemned them. They were both indispensable and disposable, both part of Rome and forever apart from it. In the stillness of night, perhaps a quiet thought drifted across the stone walls, that a society's strength is not only built on aqueducts and armies, but also on those who labored, unseen, unacknowledged, carrying burdens that left no monuments. And as we close this chapter, we step into the next. For the story of Roman prostitutes is not only about daily life, but about law, about dignity, about the invisible chains of reputation. They were not only women of the night, they were also citizens trapped in the net of Roman justice. Tomorrow, we will walk into that shadowed space where the law spoke louder than compassion, where the word infamia stripped away honor like a garment removed. And in that space, we will see how Rome itself decided who was worthy of respect and who was doomed to live without it.
In Rome, a single word could strip away a life's worth of dignity. That word was infamia. To the ears of a Roman citizen, it was more than insult. It was a legal brand, as binding as chains, as permanent as a scar. And for prostitutes, both men and women, that word became their invisible shroud, marking them as forever dishonorable. Unlike simple gossip, infamia was codified into Roman law. To be declared infamous was to lose the privileges that upheld the identity of a free citizen. It meant you could not testify in court. Your words carried no weight. It meant you could not marry into respectable families. Your bloodline was legally stained. And it meant, most cruelly, that no matter your earnings, your contracts, or your reputation among clients, the law would always see you as unworthy of trust, of respect, of honor. For the prostitutes of Rome, infamy was not a matter of whispers in the street. It was the law itself pronouncing judgment. A soldier might gamble, a merchant might cheat, a senator might indulge in scandal, but only the prostitute bore this lasting stain written into civic life. Even a freedman, once a slave, could climb into honor through service and wealth, but a prostitute, once registered under that title, could never be cleansed. The paradox deepens when we remember that Rome needed them. Rome's appetite for pleasure demanded their presence, yet the very state that profited from their existence through taxes, through regulation, was the same state that declared them untouchable. It was as if Rome whispered, "We will take your earnings, but never your dignity. That you cannot keep." In the stillness of night, one can almost imagine a prostitute sitting by the lamplight, counting coins with tired hands, while the law outside her door erased every chance at respect. She might live in the heart of the greatest empire in the world, but her name was written only in the margins, in red ink of dishonor. And softly, the thought drifts across time. How strange that one word, infamia, could weigh heavier than chains, binding souls more tightly than iron.
In Rome, dishonor was not always hidden in shadows. Sometimes it was written down in ledgers, signed, sealed, and made official. This was the role of the aediles, the city officials tasked with supervising markets, public order, and, in their own way, morality. For prostitutes, the path into infamy was not just social, it was administrative. They had to register. Imagine walking into the office of an aedile, a place lined with scrolls and clerks, the air heavy with the smell of parchment and wax. A woman, perhaps trembling, perhaps resigned, would give her name, her age, even the street or tavern where she intended to work. Sometimes she would choose a false name, knowing her real one would forever carry the scar of dishonor. But even a false name could not erase the act itself. Once registered, she was infamous. The law required this not as protection, but as control. By registering prostitutes, the state could track, monitor, and above all, tax them. Infamy in Rome was not just stigma, it was revenue. Each entry in the aedile's register meant another coin flowing into the treasury. What society declared shameful, the state transformed into profit. And yet, the paradox deepened. A man could buy their services freely without consequence, but the woman providing them bore the eternal mark. Rome punished the provider, never the consumer. The ledger of the aediles was not just a record, it was a wall,
dividing citizens who could rise into honor from those forever locked into disgrace. The act of registration was both humiliating and final. To stand before the clerk was to surrender not only your labor, but your dignity. And from that moment on, the law itself became a silent overseer. You could never be a witness in court, never wear the garments of the respectable, never marry into a family of honor. The ink dried, and so did your chance at respectability. One can almost imagine the sound of the quills scratching against parchment, a woman's name inscribed, the faint click of the seal. Outside, the streets of Rome bustled with glory and ambition, but inside that room, a life's worth of honor was quietly extinguished. And softly, as the lamps flickered, the thought rises, how strange that a government could condemn an act in words, yet catalog it so carefully in ink. How strange that the same hand which branded shame was also the one collecting the tax.
The clinking of coins was a sound the Roman state never ignored. Every market, every trade, every tavern paid its share into the empire's vast treasury. And so too did the prostitutes, though their contribution carried a bitter taste. What others gave as a duty of citizenship, they gave as a penalty of dishonor. After registration with the aediles, a prostitute became liable for taxes. It was not simply income tax, it was a tax of shame. Each coin handed over to the officials was more than money. It was a public reminder that their bodies, their choices, their very existence were commodities sanctioned and exploited by the state. Rome condemned them with one hand and collected profit with the other. The irony was unmistakable. While respectable tradesmen paid taxes to honor their role in sustaining the economy, prostitutes paid taxes as evidence of their infamy. A merchant's receipt marked his success. A prostitute's payment marked her disgrace. Both added wealth to Rome, but only one carried humiliation along with it. And yet, this humiliation was profitable. Brothel owners, pimps, and even innkeepers who rented rooms to prostitutes were taxed, creating a small but steady flow of revenue. The state knew well that desire was inexhaustible, and so was the income that could be drawn from it. What society labeled as sin, the government transformed into revenue streams. For the women themselves, the tax was another burden in a life already weighed down. Much of what they earned never reached their hands, seized by owners, brokers, or landlords, and now what little remained was clipped away by the state. The coins they turned over to the tax collector felt heavier than the ones they kept, for they carried not only the loss of wealth, but the sting of humiliation. Picture the moment, a woman waiting in line at the tax office, surrounded by shopkeepers and craftsmen. Each man pays his dues with pride, his head held high, a token of respectability. When her turn arrives, the same gesture, handing over coins, becomes something different. For her, it is not honor, but stigma. The clerk marks her name, notes her payment, and the ledger quietly reminds her that no matter how much she contributes, she will never belong among the honored citizens. Perhaps that is the deepest cruelty of the tax. It turned their very survival into profit for others while ensuring their exclusion from dignity. The empire was built on stone, blood, and coins, and among those coins were the silent payments of women who had no right to protest. And softly,
as night falls across the city, one wonders, how can a society proclaim virtue while filling its coffers with the wages of shame?
By day, they wore the robes of senators, magistrates, or respectable merchants. By night, some of these same men pulled their cloaks low, hid their faces in shadow, and slipped into the narrow alleys of the city. Respectable in the forum, dishonorable in secret, their footsteps told the story of Roman hypocrisy. The law condemned prostitutes with infamia, branding them as unworthy of trust or honor. But the men who sought them out bore no such stain. A senator could lecture in the Senate on morality in the morning, and by evening visit a brothel without consequence. His honor remained intact, his testimony valid in court, his family line untouched. The dishonor of the act never clung to him. It was always transferred to the woman who provided the service. This double standard was the essence of Rome's cruelty. The provider carried eternal disgrace. The consumer carried nothing at all. In the eyes of the law, the man's dignity was inviolable, while the woman's was expendable. Coins passed from hand to hand, and with them passed the burden of shame, always in one direction. There are whispers in ancient texts of men who wore disguises, slipping into brothels under false names. Some even wrapped themselves in cloaks to hide from their own slaves, fearing the shame of being recognized by those beneath them. Yet this fear was social, not legal. The law never struck them down. The stigma belonged only to the prostitute. Imagine the irony. A man of power, sitting in judgment over others, condemning crimes of vice, while his own nights were spent indulging the very same. The hypocrisy was so normalized that no one questioned it. Society demanded women bear the mark of infamy, while men walked away untouched. And still, the contradiction fueled Rome's machinery. The women paid taxes, endured scorn, and lost their rights. The men paid only coins and left with their dignity intact. Rome profited, men pleasured, and women bore the burden of dishonor. One can almost hear the echo of their footsteps leaving the Lupanar, boots tapping against stone, cloaks pulled close. To the world, they were honorable citizens, but within those walls, they revealed the truth. Honor was never about virtue. It was about power, and about who had the privilege to escape shame. And softly, in the stillness, a thought lingers. What does it say of a civilization when dishonor is not in the act itself, but in who is forced to carry its weight?
What is honor if it can be taken away with a single word? In the Roman world, prostitutes lived beneath the shadow of infamia, not because of violence, not because of theft, but because of who they were. Their honor was not lost through their own mistakes. It was denied to them from the start. This denial was systematic. The law made sure that no matter how hard they worked, how many coins they paid in taxes, or how many men of power they entertained, they would never belong to the circle of the respectable. A prostitute could be clever, wealthy, even beloved by her clients, but in the eyes of the law, she was forever infamous. She could not testify in court. She could not marry into a noble family. she could not escape the brand. Here lay the cruelty. Honor in Rome was not earned through virtue, it was distributed by status. A soldier could regain his honor by serving bravely. A freed slave could rise to wealth and respect. But a prostitute, once marked, could never be cleansed. Her work filled the coffers of the empire, but her name was locked outside its monuments. The paradox is painful to contemplate. Society demanded their presence, the state taxed their labor, and men of all ranks sought their company. And yet, the same society pretended they did not belong. They were woven into the fabric of Rome, but always in the threads no one wanted to see. Picture her at the end of the night, coins scattered on the table, her body weary, her spirit quiet. She lives in the very heart of the empire, but her voice cannot be heard in court, her vows cannot be honored in marriage, her dignity cannot be recognized. She has not merely lost honor, it was something she was never allowed to claim. And softly, in the silence of reflection, we see the deeper truth. Rome's brilliance was built not only on marble and steel, but also on lives forced into the margins, people condemned by a system that used them even as it erased them. The glory of Rome always cast a shadow, and within that shadow lived those whose honor was denied. Yet within the darkness there were also degrees of survival, even unexpected power. Not every prostitute was the same. Some were slaves, bound and powerless. Others were freed women, struggling, but with a sliver of choice. And some, rare but real, rose to the status of courtesans, companions to the elite, wielding influence behind closed doors. As we close this chapter of law and dishonor, we step into the next, the divided worlds of prostitutes in Rome. For though the law painted them all with the same brush of infamia, their lives were not the same. In chapter 3, we will see the difference between the chained slave, the struggling free woman, and the courtesan who could whisper into the ears of emperors.
Not all prostitutes in Rome lived the same life. Some were slaves, owned like furniture, without even the illusion of choice. Others were free women, struggling on the margins, who handed over coins to innkeepers or kept small savings for themselves. And then there were the courtesans, the meretrices of higher rank, who dined with senators, whispered secrets in palaces, and shaped politics from behind silk curtains. The contrast was startling. To the law, all were infamous, all carried infamia. Yet in practice, their lives stretched across a spectrum as wide as the empire itself. At the bottom were the slaves, trapped without hope, their bodies extensions of their master's wealth. At the middle were the free women, who, though stigmatized, could at least negotiate, manage, even keep money in deposit with bankers. At the top, rare and glittering, stood the courtesans, women like Cytheris, once a freed woman actress who became the lover of Mark Antony, or Antonia Canis, the confidant of Emperor Vespasian, wielding influence even from the shadows. The paradox was cruel. The same word, prostitute, could mean the darkest poverty or the nearest brush with power. A slave girl in a smoky brothel, forced to endure strangers one after another, shared her title with a courtesan reclining in a marble villa, her opinion shaping the course of politics. Rome spoke of them all with the same stain of infamia, yet the reality was a world divided into layers of survival, ambition,
and unexpected influence. Picture the streets. In one alley, a slave prostitute waits, her eyes lowered, her earnings pocketed by a master who sees her only as profit. Just a few streets away, a courtesan arrives at a dinner party, her perfume filling the atrium, her laughter drawing the eyes of senators. Both are women of the same profession. Both are condemned by law. But in truth, their lives are worlds apart. This is the world we step into now, a layered society of shame and power, where the same label hides stories vastly different. And softly, as the night deepens, we begin to ask, was Rome condemning them all equally, or was it secretly enthralled by the very women it pretended to despise?
What is the value of a body when it belongs not to itself but to another? For the slave prostitutes of Rome, their lives answered this question every single day. They were not workers choosing their trade. They were property, owned, bought, sold, and used like objects of commerce. In the smoky corridors of the Lupanars, most of the women were slaves. Their owners, whether wealthy citizens, innkeepers, or professional pimps, profited from every client who crossed the threshold. A slave girl did not keep her coins, did not even negotiate her price. Her body was simply the merchandise, her service the income, and her exhaustion the cost that no one else counted. The law treated her no differently than a piece of livestock. Contracts could list her alongside cattle and furniture. If she displeased her master, she could be beaten. If she fell ill, she might be replaced. Her value was measured not in dignity, but in how many asses she could earn per day. Picture the scene, a dim room lit by one flickering oil lamp, the air thick with sweat and dust. A young woman sits on the edge of a stone bed, her eyes lowered, waiting for the next set of footsteps. She does not know his name, and he does not care for hers. What matters is the coin that will change hands, not into her pocket, but into the purse of the man who owns her. There was no escape. Even her labor of survival could not free her. A soldier might fight bravely and one day buy his freedom. A slave in the household might save coins and hope to be manumitted. But for a slave prostitute, the odds were grim. Even if she earned vast sums for her master, her life remained bound by chains unseen. And yet, even here, paradox lingered. Though she was despised and voiceless, her presence was necessary. Rome's appetite for pleasure, its endless demand for bodies, relied on her suffering. Without the slave prostitutes, the bustling brothels of Pompeii and the hidden alleys of Rome would fall silent. The empire's desire was built on their exhaustion. Their voices are mostly lost in history. Few wrote about them, and none of their words survive. All that remains are the silent walls of the Lupanars, with faded graffiti that may have been their names, their prices, their existence, carved in crude Latin. traces, but no stories, shadows, but no legacy. And softly the reflection grows, how cruel that the most profitable labor could also be the most voiceless. How strange that Rome built monuments of marble for generals and emperors, but left no stone for the women whose lives were consumed in silence.
Freedom in Rome did not always mean dignity. For many women who were no longer slaves, but had to sell their bodies to survive, freedom was fragile, a brittle shield against poverty and scorn. They were the freed women prostitutes, walking a narrow path between survival and ruin. Unlike slaves, they were not owned. They could keep a portion of their earnings. Some even rented small rooms, managed their own schedules, or deposited savings with bankers. In rare cases, they acted as their own mistresses, running taverns or inns where their services were part of the business. These women had agency, but it was fragile, always threatened by the stigma of infamia. The law never let them forget their place. Registration with the aediles marked them forever. Paying taxes was not a symbol of citizenship, but a reminder of disgrace. Even if they earned enough to support a household, they could not stand in court as witnesses, nor could they marry into a respectable family. Their money might buy bread, wine, or a roof, but it could never buy honor. Picture a woman at dusk, sitting behind the counter of a modest tavern she runs. Men enter, drink, laugh, and sometimes pay for more than wine. She collects coins, places them carefully into a small chest, perhaps thinking of the future, perhaps a better room, a safer life. But in the eyes of the state, she is no different from the slave girl in the Lupanar. Her dignity is not hers to claim. And yet, in this fragile space, survival carved out unexpected possibilities. Some freed women secured modest comfort, living not as victims, but as survivors who bent the harshness of Rome into something they could endure. Their lives reveal the cracks in the system. Though branded with infamia, they could still carve out pockets of control, fragile though they were. The paradox remained sharp. The state taxed them, society scorned them, and men desired them. And in that tension, the freed woman lived, neither enslaved nor truly free. Her freedom was real, but always conditional, always precarious. And softly the reflection lingers. Perhaps freedom is never absolute, but only as strong as the dignity society is willing to grant. For these women, survival was not about honor. It was about enduring each day in a world that profited from their disgrace.
Not every prostitute in Rome was confined to dim brothels or smoky taverns. Some moved in villas, reclined on couches of marble, and whispered in the ears of men who ruled the empire. These were the courtesans, the high meretrices, whose beauty, wit, and presence granted them access to places no law could deny, even if society branded them with infamia. The contrast could not be sharper. A slave in the Lupanar endured a dozen strangers in a day. A courtesan entertained one powerful man at a time, but her influence could ripple through politics, alliances, even wars. Rome, which wrote their disgrace into law, still found itself enchanted by them. Take Cynthiris, once a freedwoman actress. On the stage, she had learned the art of performance. But it was offstage, in the arms of Mark Antony, that her influence truly blossomed. She dined beside generals, traveled in his retinue, and provoked scandal by appearing in public where respectable women would never dare. Her name carried both disgrace and fascination, proof that infamy did not erase power. Or consider Antonia Caenis, who began life as a slave, secretary to Antonia, the mother of Emperor Claudius. Freed, she became the lifelong companion of Vespasian, long before and even after he became emperor. Though never his legal wife, infamy made that impossible. Her influence was undeniable. Whispers said she managed his correspondence, shaped his alliances, and steadied his ambitions. From the shadows, she helped guide the hand of an emperor. How paradoxical it was. The law denied them marriage, testimony, and honor, yet they walked into the most guarded chambers of Rome. Senators scorned their names in public, yet courted their favor in private. The empire proclaimed them dishonorable, yet trusted them in moments of intimacy that could sway history. Imagine the scene, a banquet hall glittering with oil lamps, senators reclining in togas, wine flowing into silver cups. At the center, a courtesan laughs, her voice light, her presence magnetic. She is not their equal in law, but at that moment she commands the room. Men who debate policy by day lean closer to her by night. Behind the curtains, power bends to the hands of the dishonored. And softly, the thought lingers, perhaps power has never truly belonged to honor. Perhaps it has always belonged to those who knew how to turn society's judgment into influence, to those who could move empires, not with swords, but with whispers.
What does it mean that one word, prostitute, could describe both a slave chained to a stone bed and a courtesan whispering to an emperor? Few professions in Rome revealed such extremes, such dizzying contradictions. Between chains and thrones, between silence and influence, the lives of these women painted the truest portrait of Rome's paradox. At the bottom, the slaves endured. They had no choice, no voice, no future. Their bodies were merchandise, their nights consumed by strangers, their value measured in coins that never touched their hands. They lived and died in shadows, remembered only by faint graffiti and fading frescoes. In the middle, the freed women survived. They could keep a little, plan a little, hope a little. They ran taverns, rented rooms, and sometimes deposited savings. Their freedom was real, but fragile, always under the weight of infamy, always outside the gates of respectability. At the top, the courtesans sparkled. They shared tables with generals, laughed in the halls of power, and held the ears of emperors. They too bore infamy, but their voices could shape politics, alliances, even history. In their laughter, Rome's double standard was exposed. Society condemned them, yet could not resist them.
The thread uniting them all was dishonor. The law marked them equally, but life scattered them across a spectrum of despair and influence. A slave, a freedwoman, a courtesan, all lived beneath the same shadow, yet some never escaped the cellar, while others brushed the edges of thrones. Picture Rome at night. In one alley, a girl waits in silence, chained by circumstance. In a villa, a courtesan raises a silver cup, her smile catching the light. Both are Rome. Both are condemned. Both are necessary to the empire's restless heartbeat.
Sometimes the body did not need to speak. The clothes spoke for it. In Rome, appearance was not only fashion, but law, a visual code that revealed who you were before you ever opened your mouth. And for prostitutes, this code was inescapable. Respectable women wore the stola, a long gown that signaled chastity, family honor, and lawful marriage. To see a woman in a stola was to know that she was a matron, shielded by dignity and protected by law. The stola was not merely cloth, it was a declaration of belonging. But prostitutes were forbidden from wearing the stola. Instead, they were ordered to wear the toga, a garment usually reserved for men. Draped across their shoulders, the toga became a mark of exclusion, a sign that they were not wives, not matrons, not respectable. It was the law itself stitched into fabric, forcing their bodies to announce their dishonor to every passer-by. The irony was cruel. The toga, symbol of Roman citizenship for men, became the uniform of shame for women. What proclaimed honor on one body condemned another. A senator could wrap himself in it with pride. A prostitute wore it as a sentence. The same fabric, opposite meanings. Rome's hypocrisy woven into thread. Jewelry, too, carried meaning. Respectable women wore modest ornaments, subtle tokens of wealth, but prostitutes were associated with bright, gaudy jewelry, necklaces that sparkled in lamplight, bracelets that clinked with every movement. Combined with painted faces and dyed fabrics, these adornments created a spectacle, an allure society demanded yet condemned at the same time. Picture a street in twilight. A matron in stola passes, her garments muted, her steps measured. Beside her, a prostitute in toga, jewels glittering, colors flashing against the evening light. Both are Roman women, but one is wrapped in honor, the other in infamy. Their very appearances are arguments, silent but unignorable. And so, the prostitute's clothing became more than costume. It was a weapon and a warning. To some, it invited desire. To others, it signaled danger. For Rome, it was convenient. The unhonored marked themselves, saving society the trouble of guessing. And softly, a question lingers. If honor and shame can be sewn into fabric, what does that say about a civilization that judged women not by their voices or deeds,
but by the garments on their shoulders.
Sometimes a garment can be heavier than chains. For prostitutes in Rome, that garment was the toga. Unlike the simple stola of matrons, the toga was forced upon them by law, turning clothing into a symbol of disgrace. The stola wrapped women in dignity. It was a declaration of lawful marriage, of chastity, of belonging to the honorable class of Roman matrons. A woman in stola was untouchable, shielded not just by fabric, but by social expectation. To see her in the forum was to see a pillar of family virtue. But the prostitute could not wear the stola. Instead, the law demanded she drape herself in the toga, a garment that in other contexts spoke of citizenship, politics, and masculine authority. When a man wore the toga, he displayed honor. When a woman wore it under compulsion, it marked her as dishonorable. The same folds of fabric that exalted one body condemned another. Imagine the cruelty of this visual code. A prostitute walking through the streets could never escape her identity. The toga spoke louder than her voice, announcing her infamy before she even opened her mouth. It was not just clothing, it was a verdict stitched into every seam. The paradox was visible in every crowd. In the marketplace, a matron in stola might walk past, head held high, secure in her untouchable dignity. Beside her, a prostitute in toga shimmered with jewels and bright colors, her body turned into spectacle. One garment proclaimed honor, the other proclaimed shame. Yet both were citizens of the same city, breathing the same air, subject to the same empire. And yet there was danger in this spectacle. The toga drew eyes, marked boundaries, and carried signals of both invitation and warning. To some men, it was a lure, an unspoken advertisement. To others, it was contempt, a reminder that she was excluded from respectability. To Rome, it was convenient. Dishonor did not need whispers, it was paraded in fabric. Picture a festival evening. Torches burn, laughter rises, matrons in stola stand at the edges, dignified and distant. But among the crowd, the prostitutes in togas become a vivid current of color, their presence impossible to ignore. Their garments made them visible, even when society pretended they should be invisible. And softly, the thought lingers. How powerful must cloth be when it can transform into chains more binding than iron? How strange that Rome, with all its laws and legions, relied on fabric to declare which women were worthy of respect and which were condemned to disgrace.
Colors in ancient Rome carried meaning far beyond fashion. They were a language of their own, signaling status, morality, and identity before a word was ever spoken. For women labeled with infamia, colors became both a necessity and a burden, visible marks that made them stand out in every crowd. While Roman matrons clothed themselves in modest tones, whites, soft browns, or gentle earth colors, prostitutes were associated with garments dyed in striking shades. Crimson reds, deep purples, and golden yellows glowed beneath the lamplight, impossible to ignore. To the Roman eye, these hues carried a dual message: attraction and warning. Red suggested passion, a signal of intensity and boldness. Purple, normally reserved for nobility, when worn outside that circle, turned into a provocative parody,
drawing attention while reminding everyone of the barriers of class. Yellow, radiant and unsettling, announced visibility, making the wearer impossible to overlook. These colors transformed clothing into statements, not of choice, but of identity, imposed by law and expectation. The irony was sharp. Society demanded that these women remain outside respectability, yet also demanded that they remain visible. Bright fabrics and vivid dyes marked them in public space, turning their presence into spectacle. They could not blend into the crowd, even if invisibility might have been their only form of safety. Picture a crowded festival evening. Torches flicker, music echoes, and matrons in muted stolas stand in the background, calm and dignified. Moving among them are women in bold fabrics, necklaces catching the firelight, faces brightened with paint. Their appearance made them part of the celebration, yet also reminders of boundaries. They were simultaneously included and excluded, visible yet never accepted. This paradox became a constant in their lives. The same colors that drew private attention often became reasons for public scorn. The same fabrics admired in one moment could be mocked in another. Rome's double standard was stitched into every garment: fascination in private, condemnation in public. Even in the ruins of Pompeii, graffiti carved into walls preserved this visual reality, identifying women not only by their names, but also by the descriptions of the clothing and colors they wore. History remembered them not through their own voices, but through pigments and scratches on stone. And softly, reflection arises. How fragile is dignity when it can be assigned or stripped away by color in fabric? How strange that a civilization so proud of its laws and monuments let something as simple as dye in cloth decide whether a woman was honored or disgraced.
Sometimes it was not the words or the clothing, but the sparkle of jewelry or the brush of paint that carried the loudest message. In Rome, the body could be transformed into a canvas, and prostitutes were painted in colors and adorned with ornaments that made them impossible to mistake. Respectable matrons wore jewelry with restraint. A small brooch, a modest necklace, or a pair of earrings might show wealth, but never excess. Their beauty was meant to reflect order, moderation, and control. In contrast, the women marked with infamy often carried bright, glittering adornments. Necklaces heavy with glass beads, bracelets stacked on both arms, earrings that swung with every step. To the Roman eye, these were not just accessories, but signals, a way of saying different, available, outside the order. Cosmetics deepened this signal. While matrons kept their faces natural, prostitutes were associated with rouged cheeks, darkened eyes, and painted lips. Roman satirists mocked them for it, writing that too much paint was the mark of dishonor. But mockery did not stop fascination. The very colors they condemned were the ones that drew attention in the night. Picture a street lit by oil lamps. A matron passes quietly, her jewelry simple, her face unpainted. Behind her walks another woman,
her bracelets catching the lamplight, her eyes shadowed with dark pigment, her cheeks touched with rouge. She cannot hide, even if she wanted to. Her appearance is a living proclamation, louder than speech. The paradox was cruel. Society demanded that these women make themselves visible through brightness and decoration, yet ridiculed them for doing so. The same jewels that brought admiration in private became accusations in public. The same painted face that lured eyes at night was mocked in the daylight. Visibility was survival, but it was also exposure. And yet, there was subtle power in this performance. By mastering the language of appearance, some women could control how they were seen. Bright ornaments and painted faces became tools, dangerous but effective. They could draw attention, negotiate from it, even carve out a fragile form of agency in a society that denied them dignity. But history remembered them not for their power, only for their display. Writers sneered at their rouge, scorned their bangles, and reduced their existence to decoration. What remains in ruins and texts are images of women painted and jeweled, always seen, rarely heard. And softly, reflection arises. How strange that Rome, a civilization of marble and law, judged women most harshly not by their actions, but by the brightness of their ornaments and the shades of their painted faces.
What does it mean when beauty itself becomes a form of danger? In Rome, prostitutes lived within this paradox every day. Their clothing, their colors, their ornaments, and their painted faces were not simply decorations. They were marks, at once alluring and condemning, signals that both invited and excluded. The toga on their shoulders, the bright fabrics, the dazzling jewels, all of it was more than fashion. It was a uniform of infamy, forcing them to carry their dishonor in public view. They could not hide in crowds, could not escape judgment. Every step through the forum, every glance in the marketplace was framed by the garments and ornaments that told their story without words. And yet the very signs meant to shame them gave them power of a strange kind. They could draw eyes, shape attention, even bend fascination into fragile leverage. Rome condemned their rouge, mocked their jewelry, and forbade their stola. But Rome also filled its banquets with their presence, its poems with their images, and its nights with their colors. Picture the contradiction. A matron in stola, modest and silent, representing lawful honor. A prostitute in toga, vivid with paint and glitter, representing dishonor. One carried dignity in fabric, the other carried danger. But both walked the same streets, both part of the same empire, both essential to Rome's restless heartbeat. The danger lay not in violence, but in perception. Rome feared what it could not fully control, the ability of beauty, performance, and presence to unsettle order. By labeling them with infamia and marking them with visible signs, the state sought to control the uncontrollable. But history shows us the paradox. The more Rome tried to brand them as shameful, the more brightly they stood out. And softly, the reflection grows. Perhaps true danger lies not in appearance, but in the power of being seen. These women, even as outcasts, forced Rome to look at itself, to confront its double standards, its desire, and its fear.
And as Chapter 4 closes, we step forward into their world not just as individuals, but as part of the city's landscape. For they were not only marked by fabric and jewels, but also by the spaces they inhabited. The streets, the taverns, the brothels, these were their stages, their workplaces, their prisons. In Chapter 5, we will walk into those spaces, the crowded marketplaces where they were both visible and invisible, the taverns where wine and bodies mingled, and the infamous Lupanar, the brothel of Pompeii, whose walls still whisper their names.
The marketplace was not only where Rome bought its bread, it was where it revealed its soul. Among the stalls of fruit and fish, between the cries of merchants and the jingle of coins, prostitutes also moved, visible yet unwelcome, present yet excluded. In the bustling forum, every Roman had a place. Senators gave speeches, merchants struck bargains, slaves carried loads. Respectable matrons appeared, wrapped in their stolas, embodying dignity. And in the same space, the women in togas, adorned with bright colors and jewelry, signaled their role with every glance they received. The paradox was clear. They were needed, yet condemned. Some positioned themselves near taverns or bathhouses. Others lingered at the edges of markets where the crowds ensured attention. They were part of the city's rhythm, but never acknowledged as legitimate players in its dance. Imagine the scene, the midday sun beating on marble, sellers shouting prices, children darting through the crowd. And amid all this, a woman waits, her toga marking her instantly. No words are required. The fabric has already spoken. She is there, yet not fully allowed to belong. For many, survival depended on these public spaces. The marketplace was both an opportunity and a humiliation. Coins earned, but dignity denied. The presence of prostitutes was tolerated, but only as shadows at the edge of the Roman economy. And softly, reflection arises. The Forum was Rome's pride, its heart of power and trade. Yet its very stones carried the silent footsteps of those who were both seen and erased. To walk through the market was to witness not only commerce, but also Rome's uneasy conscience.
If the marketplace was the stage, then the tavern was the backstage, louder, darker, more dangerous. Taverns were where wine flowed, dice clattered, and reputations unraveled. For prostitutes, taverns were both opportunity and trap. Innkeepers often doubled as brokers, renting out rooms, taking cuts of earnings. A woman could sometimes manage her own small tavern, blending survival with business. But taverns also carried violence, drunkenness, and danger. The laughter of dice games might turn into arguments. The promise of coins could end in exploitation. Survival here required resilience, sharp instincts, and endless compromise. And then there was the Lupanar, the brothel. Pompeii's ruins still whisper its memory. Narrow rooms with stone beds, walls covered with graffiti and faded frescoes depicting acts long censured. Here, survival was industrialized. Women were lined in cells, customers shuffled in and out, and the business of desire turned human lives into routine. Picture the space, dim corridors, oil lamps flickering, voices echoing against stone. A door opens, a man leaves, another enters. For the women inside, time was measured not in hours, but in footsteps. The Lupanar was both workplace and prison, both opportunity and erasure. Yet even here, paradox lingered. Rome condemned them, yet taxed them. Society mocked them, yet relied on them. The tavern and Lupanar revealed Rome's contradictions in their starkest form. The places most disdained were the ones most frequented. And softly, reflection settles. These spaces, noisy and rough, were also Rome's silent truths. To step into a tavern or brothel was to see the empire's double life, its appetite for order by day, its hunger for escape by night.
What happened when the doors closed and the crowds were gone? Behind the walls of taverns, inns, and brothels, life slowed, and what remained was not spectacle, but silence. For prostitutes in Rome, the public display was only half their story. The other half was lived in private, rooms where laughter faded into loneliness and coins clinked louder than voices. The Roman world saw them as constant performers, marked in togas, painted in colors, visible in every street. Yet in their hidden spaces, they were not performers. They were women counting coins, nursing bruises, whispering memories of lives they might have had. In the solitude of the night, the grandeur of Rome shrank to the size of a narrow bed and a dim lamp. Imagine a room in Pompeii's Lupanar, stone walls, a single oil lamp, graffiti scratched by strangers. A woman sits alone, her jewelry placed carefully aside, her painted face beginning to fade. Outside, the city roars with festivals and speeches. Inside, her world is no larger than a handful of shadows. Some sought comfort in small rituals, braiding hair, saving coins in jars, praying quietly to Venus or Fortuna for protection. Others found fragments of community, sharing food or stories with women who lived the same fate. But always a quiet ache lingered, the knowledge that society saw their work, but never their humanity. Rome praised its generals, poets, and emperors, carving their names in stone. These women too built the city's nights, yet their names vanished into silence. Their rooms, their sorrows, their private moments, lost to history, except for the faintest traces on ruined walls. And softly, reflection arises. Perhaps the greatest cruelty was not the labor they endured, but the loneliness imposed upon them. For even in a city of millions, their hidden rooms remained islands of silence.
Every hidden room carried its own story. Some stories were carved in graffiti, others vanished with time. What remained was the quiet truth. Behind painted faces and bright fabrics were women who carried sorrows too heavy for history to remember. Many mourned the lives they never had. Some were born slaves, never knowing freedom. Others were once wives or freed women who fell into poverty and had no choice but survival through selling what society would never forgive. Each night their thoughts stretched toward what might have been a family, a different trade, a chance at dignity. Yet hope fragile as it was, persisted. Some saved coins in secret, dreaming of buying a small shop or room of their own. Others found tenderness in fleeting relationships, moments of kindness from clients or companions. A few, like the famous courtesans, even shaped the politics of Rome, turning infamy into influence. Picture a woman at dawn, the city still quiet. She stands at her doorway, looking toward the forum where senators will soon gather. She knows she cannot stand among them, cannot testify, cannot marry into honor. But still she breathes the same Roman air, walks the same streets, and dreams the same fragile dreams. Rome's monuments recorded victories, but never recorded these silent hopes. Yet without them, the city's nights would have been emptier, its humanity poorer. The hidden sorrows of these women, though erased from official history, remain etched in the imagination of those who listen. And softly, reflection settles. Perhaps the measure of a civilization is not only in the marble it leaves behind, but also in the private lives it chose to forget.
What happens when the rules of society pause, even for a night? In Rome, festivals were moments when the usual boundaries weakened, when laughter drowned out law, and when those marked with shame could suddenly move with unexpected freedom. The calendar of Rome was crowded with feasts, Saturnalia, Floralia, Bacchanalia, each carrying its own rituals of reversal. During Saturnalia, masters and slaves dined together, togas were exchanged for colorful tunics, and the streets filled with merriment that ignored rank. For women branded with Infamia, such nights offered rare moments when their presence did not clash so violently with order. Take Floralia, the festival of Flora, goddess of flowers. Historical accounts describe games, plays, and dances where prostitutes were expected to participate openly. What was usually mocked in private became spectacle in public. The same bright garments and painted faces that marked them as outcasts became part of the festival itself, woven into the city's joy. For one night, they were not hidden, but central. Imagine the forum at night, garlands of flowers strung across pillars, torches burning high, wine flowing freely. Matrons in their stolas stayed at the edges, holding dignity intact, while prostitutes moved among the crowd, laughing, dancing, playing roles that society normally forbade them. For once, shame was transformed into celebration. The paradox was unmistakable. Rome condemned them by law, but in its festivals it invited them to entertain, to be seen, even to be applauded. Their existence, normally pushed to the margins, was pulled to the center. And softly reflection arises. Perhaps festivals revealed more about Rome than laws ever could. When the empire let go of its rigid order, even for a few nights, it showed the truth that its society both rejected and depended on those it called dishonorable.
But what happens when the music ends? Festivals brought nights of permission, but mornings always brought silence. For prostitutes, the joy of being included was fleeting, vanishing as quickly as the garlands faded and the torches died.
During the festival, their laughter filled the streets. They could dance openly, speak boldly, mingle with senators, soldiers, and merchants without immediate scorn. They were, for a moment, woven into the fabric of Rome's joy. But when dawn returned, so too did the law. The toga remained a mark of disgrace, the taxes a burden, the rights denied unchanged. Imagine the contrast: a woman laughing under torchlight at Floralia, showered with flowers, praised for her performance. Hours later, as the city wakes, she walks home past matrons who avert their gaze. The garlands are trampled underfoot, the wine cups empty, and the world has shifted back. Celebration dissolved into stigma, applause into silence. Rome needed these reversals. Festivals allowed the empire to release tension, to taste chaos before returning to order. Prostitutes, paradoxically, were essential to this ritual, both condemned and required, both mocked and celebrated. They embodied the empire's double life, its need to both hide and reveal its desires. And softly, reflection settles. Perhaps the true lesson of these nights is that boundaries are fragile. What was forbidden by day was permitted by night, and what was shameful in law became central in celebration. Rome's strength lay not only in its discipline, but also in its ability to bend without breaking. As the festivals fade, we step forward to see what remained behind: the private lives, the scars, the legacies whispered in hidden corners of history. For beyond the nights of permission lay the return to walls, rooms, and the endless cycle of survival.
Was it coercion, or was it survival? That question has haunted every reflection on the lives of Rome's prostitutes. The truth, of course, lies in the uncomfortable middle, a society without real choices, where survival itself could be mistaken for agency. In Rome, many women were forced by slavery, poverty, or the iron laws of Infamia. Others, however, managed to carve out spaces of influence, saving money, running taverns, or even shaping politics from behind the curtains. The paradox is unavoidable. The same profession could mean chains for one and power for another. Imagine two women walking the same street at dusk. One is a slave in the Lupanar, bound to serve until her strength fades. The other, a courtesan reclining in a villa, whispering advice to a powerful man. Both wear the toga, both bear infamy, but their realities could not be more different. Survival for one, subtle authority for the other. And here lies the deeper question. Was this power real, or was it tolerated by the system that needed them while despising them? Rome made sure they could never marry into honor, never testify in court, never erase their mark of shame. Yet at banquets, festivals, and even in palaces, they influenced men who commanded legions. This contradiction still echoes today. In modern debates about women's autonomy, labor, and dignity, the same questions remain. When someone chooses under constraint, is it really a choice? And when someone gains power in a condemned role, is that empowerment or survival dressed in brighter colors?
And softly, reflection arises. Perhaps Rome's lesson is that agency is never pure. It is always shaped by systems, but also by the resilience of individuals who refuse to vanish in silence.
Who truly had control? The system or the women themselves? That is the viral question worth asking today. Rome's prostitutes lived between chains and influence, dishonor and survival. And in that in-between space, they carved stories that history could never erase. Modern debates about labor, dignity, and women's rights echo their world. We still ask, is empowerment real if it comes from within constraints? Can dignity survive when society brands some work as unworthy? And most provocatively, are those who profit from the system more powerful, or those who learn to bend it? Picture a modern boardroom, a university, or even social media. Power still plays its double games. Some voices are excluded, mocked, or dismissed, yet they find ways to influence, to shape, to endure. The questions of Rome have never left us. Rome may have chained their bodies, but it never silenced their presence. And today we still confront the same paradox: control and resistance, shame and influence, survival and autonomy. And here lies the punchline, delivered with a half-smile. Maybe Rome thought it controlled them, but history still remembers their colors, their laughter, and their whispers. Meanwhile, most senators of the time are forgotten. So perhaps the truest danger is not dishonor itself, but underestimating those who live within it. Rome's lesson remains viral. Power is never where you think it is. Sometimes it wears jewels and paint. Sometimes it hides in silence. But it always survives. And softly, as velvet dusk closes, the story is not just Rome's, it is ours.
History remembers not only emperors and senators, it remembers whispers on broken walls. Rome thought it controlled them, branding them with shame, marking them with infamia. But even in silence they endured. Some were trapped in chains, others carved influence in hidden ways. And here is the paradox. The empire that mocked them could not live without them. Festivals invited their laughter, banquets echoed with their presence, and even politics felt their unseen hand. Rome thought honor lived in the stola, but the memory of the toga still lingers today. So what does this mean for us? We too live in a world of double standards, where choice and survival blur, where dignity is judged by roles, not humanity. The question remains viral. Who truly controls? Systems that condemn, or individuals who bend the rules to survive? Perhaps the real danger lies in underestimating those society calls dishonorable. After all, most emperors' names are forgotten, but we still remember Cythera, Antonia Canis, and the faceless women whose whispers remain etched in Pompey's stones. And softly the lesson closes. Dusk has fallen on Rome, but its questions walk with us still.